Hello and welcome back to Code Your English, the channel where we sharpen our language skills while exploring ideas that actually matter in life. Before we begin today's journey, I want you to sit with one question, and I want you to answer it honestly, even if the honest answer makes you a little uncomfortable. Have you ever promised yourself that this time would be different, that this time you would finally wake up early, finally finish the project, finally speak up in the meeting, only to break that very promise a few days later? If you paused, even for a second, then this episode is exactly where you need to be. For most of our lives, we are taught to believe that self-trust is something we are simply born with. We look at certain people and we say, "She's just naturally confident," or "He's always been the kind of person who believes in himself." And slowly, without ever questioning it, we begin to place ourselves into one of two categories. Either we are the confident ones, or we are not. Either we are the kind of person who trusts their own judgment, or we are the kind of person who doesn't. But what if this entire way of thinking is completely backwards? What if confidence isn't a trait you're handed at birth, like the color of your eyes, but something else entirely? Here is the central idea we will explore together today, and I want you to really absorb it. Self-trust isn't a personality trait, it's a relationship. And like every relationship you've ever had, with a friend, a partner, a parent, it is built, strengthened, or slowly damaged through repeated experiences. You don't trust a friend because they were born trustworthy. You trust them because, over time, their actions matched their words. The same rule, the exact same rule, applies to the relationship you have with yourself. So, before we move forward, let's invite a little honest reflection. When was the last time you truly trusted your own judgment, without needing someone else to confirm that you made the right choice? Do you find yourself relying more on your own inner voice? Or do you lean more heavily on the opinions of everyone around you? And perhaps the most important question of all, what kind of relationship do you currently have with yourself? Is it warm and dependable, like a friendship that has lasted for years? Or is it strained, inconsistent, full of broken promises and quiet disappointments? Keep these questions in the back of your mind as we move forward, because in the next section, we're going to dig into something most people never stop to examine: where self-trust actually begins, and more importantly, where it quietly begins to disappear. Why most people don't trust themselves. Purpose aside, let's get straight into the heart of the matter. Self-trust isn't usually destroyed overnight. There is rarely one single dramatic event, one catastrophic failure, that suddenly makes a person stop believing in themselves. Instead, self-trust is slowly, quietly, almost invisibly weakened over months and years through a series of small, seemingly insignificant moments. Think about breaking small promises to yourself. You tell yourself you'll go to bed early, and then you don't. You tell yourself you'll finish the report today, and then you push it to tomorrow. Each of these moments feels tiny on its own, almost too small to matter. But they accumulate. Alongside broken promises, there's the constant habit of comparison. We scroll through the lives of others, measuring our unfinished chapters against their highlight reels, and in doing so, we quietly teach ourselves that we are somehow behind, somehow not enough. Then there's the habit of seeking external validation, needing someone else to tell us that our decision was the right one before we can feel comfortable moving forward. And underneath all of this sits fear, the fear of making mistakes, the fear of being wrong, the fear of being judged for choosing differently than everyone else. For many of us, this pattern was shaped even earlier, in childhood environments where decisions were made for us, where our opinions were overruled, where we learned that someone else usually knew better. Now, let's talk about the internal dialogue that develops from all of this, Every single time you break a small promise to yourself, your brain quietly absorbs a lesson. It doesn't announce this lesson loudly. It doesn't send you a notification. It simply, silently, updates its expectations. And the lesson often sounds something like this. Maybe I can't rely on myself. Say that sentence again in your mind. Maybe I can't rely on myself. This is a devastating belief to carry, and yet millions of people carry it every single day without ever naming it directly. This brings us to an important cognitive pattern worth understanding. Your mind is constantly collecting evidence about who you are and what you're capable of, much like a detective quietly building a case file. If your daily behavior repeatedly contradicts your stated intentions, if you say one thing and do another, again and again, your brain begins to expect inconsistency from you. It stops being surprised when you cancel plans with yourself. It stops being surprised when you give up halfway. And this expectation becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because once your mind expects inconsistency, it becomes far easier to justify the next broken promise. So, here's a moment for honest reflection. How often do you ignore your own intuition? That quiet inner nudge that tells you something before you can fully explain why. And out of all the decisions you make in a single day, how many of them are actually, truly yours? And how many are shaped by what you think you're supposed to do, or what others expect from you? If self-trust can be broken this slowly, through these tiny repeated moments, then a hopeful question naturally follows. Can it also be rebuilt in the exact same way? Through small, repeated moments? But this time, working in your favor instead of against you. That is exactly where we're headed next. Self-trust is built through evidence, not positive thinking. Let's challenge something that gets repeated constantly in motivational content, something that sounds inspiring but often falls apart in practice. Many people believe that self-trust comes from affirmations alone, from standing in front of a mirror and repeating, "I am confident, I am capable, I believe in myself." And while there is nothing wrong with positive language, here is the uncomfortable truth. Self-trust doesn't come from affirmations alone. It comes from evidence. Think about how trust actually works between two people. You don't trust your closest friend because they told you, in a single conversation, that they were trustworthy. You trust them because of years of consistent behavior, because they showed up when they said they would, because they kept your secrets, because their actions lined up with their words, over and over again. We trust ourselves for exactly the same reason. Not because we say kind things to ourselves in the mirror, but because our actions consistently prove that our word means something. Let's look at some concrete examples of what this evidence actually looks like in daily life. Waking up at the time you said you would, even when the bed feels warmer than usual. Keeping one small commitment, even one that nobody else would ever notice or applaud. Saying no to something and actually meaning it, rather than caving under pressure 5 minutes later. Finishing what you started, even the small, unglamorous tasks that nobody is watching you complete. Each of these moments might seem minor in isolation, but together they form the foundation of something much larger. Here's an important distinction to understand. Confidence often follows action, not the other way around. Most people wait to feel confident before they act. They think, once I feel more sure of myself, I'll start speaking up in meetings. Or, once I feel more confident, I'll start that new habit. But this order is backwards. Confidence is usually the result of action, not the cause of it. Self-trust, similarly, follows consistency. You don't think your way into trusting yourself. You act your way into it, one small proof at a time. To make this idea easier to hold on to, Let's use a metaphor. Think of self-trust as a savings account, an emotional bank account that you are either depositing into or withdrawing from every single day. Every kept promise, no matter how small, is a deposit. Every ignored commitment, every broken agreement with yourself is a withdrawal. And just like any bank account, if you withdraw more than you deposit, you eventually find yourself running on empty, wondering why you feel so disconnected from your own sense of capability. So take a moment now and ask yourself honestly, what kind of balance is currently sitting in your emotional bank account? Are you in a place of abundance, where you've made more deposits than withdrawals? Or are you overdrawn, running a deficit that's been quietly building for years? There's no judgment in this question, only awareness, because awareness is always the first step toward change. The hidden cost of distrusting yourself. It's easy to underestimate how deeply self-trust, or the lack of it, shapes nearly every corner of our lives. This isn't a small, isolated issue that only affects how you feel about yourself in quiet, private moments. Low self-trust quietly infiltrates your relationships, your career, your ability to learn new things, your physical health, and every decision you make, both large and small. It's a thread that runs through everything, often invisible until you know exactly where to look for it. Consider decision fatigue, a very real and exhausting phenomenon. People who don't trust themselves find themselves constantly asking, "What would everyone else do in this situation?" Instead of pausing to ask the much more honest and revealing question, "What feels true to me?" This constant outsourcing of judgment is mentally and emotionally draining. It means every decision, even small ones like what to order for lunch or which route to take home, becomes a small crisis requiring outside approval. Over time, this creates a kind of quiet exhaustion that many people misidentify as laziness or lack of motivation, when really it's the result of never fully trusting their own internal compass. Let's also talk about perfectionism, something so many of us wear almost like a badge of honor. We tell ourselves and others that we simply have high standards, that we care deeply about doing things well. But if we're being truly honest, perfectionism is often fear disguised as high standards. It's the fear of being seen as inadequate, the fear of proving, once again, that we can't be relied upon, dressed up in the more socially acceptable language of ambition and excellence. And then there's procrastination, perhaps one of the most misunderstood struggles of our time. We often assume that procrastination is about laziness or poor time management, but for many people, the truth cuts much deeper. Sometimes we're not afraid of failure itself. We're afraid of proving ourselves unreliable again, afraid of adding one more piece of evidence to the growing pile that says, "See, you can't count on yourself." So instead of risking that painful confirmation, we delay. We avoid. We tell ourselves we'll start tomorrow, because tomorrow feels safer than today. So here is a question worth sitting with, even if it stings a little. How many opportunities have you delayed, postponed, or quietly let slip away, simply because you doubted yourself before anyone else even had the chance to? How many conversations did you avoid starting? How many applications did you never submit? How many ideas did you never voice? All because your own self-doubt got there first. Understanding this hidden cost is important, but understanding alone isn't enough to change anything. So now, let's turn our attention toward something far more useful. How do we actually begin to rebuild what has been slowly worn down over time? Rebuilding self-trust. 1. Promise at a time. Here is something genuinely reassuring. Rebuilding self-trust doesn't require a dramatic life overhaul. You don't need to quit your job, move to a new city, or completely reinvent yourself overnight. In fact, Most attempts at sudden, dramatic transformation fail precisely because they're too big, too overwhelming, and too disconnected from the small, quiet reality of daily life. Real rebuilding starts with something far more modest: microscopic promises. Promises so small that keeping them barely requires effort, yet so consistent that they slowly rewrite the story your mind tells about you. Let's look at what these microscopic promises might actually look like in practice. Reading one single page of a book you've been meaning to start. Walking for 5 minutes around your neighborhood, even if you don't feel like exercising at all. Speaking up once in a conversation where you would normally stay silent. Keeping your morning routine exactly as planned, even on a day when everything in you wants to skip it. Journaling for 2 minutes, just enough to get a few honest thoughts onto paper. None of these actions are impressive on their own. None of them would make headlines or impress a stranger. But that's exactly the point. This connects directly to what we understand about habit psychology. Small, consistent actions don't just create good habits, they actually reshape identity itself. Identity, at its core, grows from repeated behavior, not from isolated one-time moments of inspiration. You don't become a reader by reading one incredible book once. You become a reader by reading a little bit, consistently, day after day. The same principle applies to becoming someone who trusts themselves. You don't become that person through one grand gesture. You become that person through repeated, ordinary proof. Now, let's talk honestly about resilience, because this part matters just as much as consistency itself. Missing a promise once, one single time, isn't failure. It's simply being human. What actually damages trust isn't the missed day itself, it's what happens afterward. Giving up entirely after missing once, deciding that the whole effort was pointless because of one slip, is where trust truly begins breaking again. Real rebuilding requires a kind of gentle persistence, the willingness to return to the promise the very next day, without turning one missed moment into an excuse to abandon the entire process. So, here's a reflection worth genuinely considering. What is one promise so small, so modest, that you honestly couldn't fail it? Something so achievable that even on your worst day, your most exhausted, unmotivated day, you could still follow through. Start there. Not with something impressive. Start with something nearly impossible to break. Learning to listen to your inner voice again. As we rebuild self-trust through small, consistent actions, something else begins to quietly resurface. Our ability to actually hear ourselves again. Somewhere along the way, many of us lost touch with our own inner voice, drowned out by noise, obligation, and the constant opinions of everyone around us. So let's talk about how we begin listening again. First, it's important to distinguish between intuition and impulse, because these two are often confused, and confusing them can lead us astray. Not every emotion deserves obedience. A sudden urge to quit something difficult or to say something harsh in anger might be an impulse rather than genuine intuition. But here's the nuance worth holding on to. While not every emotion deserves obedience, every emotion does deserve attention. Dismissing our feelings entirely is just as harmful as blindly following every one of them. The goal isn't to obey every internal signal, but to notice it, to sit with it, and to understand what it might be trying to tell us. This naturally brings us to the internal dialogue we carry with us constantly, whether we realize it or not. Many people speak to themselves in ways they would absolutely never speak to a friend. Harsh, critical, impatient language becomes the default internal soundtrack. And over time, this erodes the very trust we're trying to rebuild. If you wouldn't say it to someone you care about, it's worth asking why it feels acceptable to say it to yourself. Mindfulness plays a crucial role here as well. Creating small moments of silence throughout your day, even just a minute or two, gives your inner voice room to actually be heard. Listening before reacting, rather than immediately responding to every stimulus around you, allows for a kind of internal clarity that's almost impossible to access in a constant state of noise and distraction. Noticing automatic thoughts, those quick, almost invisible judgments that pass through our minds without invitation, is another powerful practice, because awareness of these thoughts is the first step toward gently questioning them instead of automatically believing them. Here's a question worth pausing on. When was the last time you paused long enough to actually hear your own voice beneath all the noise, beneath the notifications, the opinions, the endless stream of other people's thoughts competing for your attention? To help this idea settle in, consider this metaphor. Your intuition isn't loud. It doesn't shout over everything else demanding your attention. It's more like hearing one single instrument in a crowded orchestra. Easy to miss if you're not paying close attention. Easy to overlook amid the noise of everything else playing at once. But here's the beautiful part. The quieter your mind becomes, the easier that one instrument is to recognize. The less internal noise you're carrying, the more clearly you can hear the one voice that has been trying to reach you all along. Your own. Why failure can actually strengthen self-trust. Let's now confront one of the most common and most damaging beliefs many of us carry. If I fail, I'll lose confidence. This belief feels intuitive, almost obvious, and yet it's fundamentally flawed. Let's unpack why. Here's the truth that reframes everything. Failure only destroys trust when we abandon ourselves afterward. It's not the failure itself that causes the damage. It's what we do in the moments that follow. If we respond to failure with harsh self-criticism, with giving up entirely, with treating one mistake as proof of some deeper, permanent inadequacy, then yes, failure becomes destructive. But if we respond with compassion, with curiosity, with a willingness to try again, failure can actually become one of the most powerful tools for building self-trust that exists. This is where resilience becomes so important to understand correctly. Emotionally healthy people don't trust themselves because they never fail. That would be an impossible standard, one that no human being could ever meet. Instead, they trust themselves because they know, with quiet certainty, that they'll respond constructively when failure inevitably happens. Their confidence isn't rooted in avoiding mistakes. It's rooted in knowing how they'll handle mistakes when they arrive. Think about an athlete who trains for years, only to lose an important competition. Think about a musician who plays a piece flawlessly in practice, only to stumble during a live performance. Think about a language learner, perhaps someone very much like you, watching this very episode, who mispronounces a word or forgets vocabulary in the middle of a conversation. In every one of these examples, the person involved expects mistakes as a natural part of the process. Because mistakes, in each of these fields, are understood correctly as information, not identity. A wrong note doesn't make someone a bad musician. A grammatical error doesn't make someone a bad English speaker. It simply provides information about what to practice next. So here's a reflection to carry with you. How differently would you approach life, work, relationships, and even learning a new language if failure stopped feeling like a verdict on your worth, and instead became simply feedback, information, a signal pointing you toward your next step forward? Becoming someone you can depend on. As we move toward the final stretch of today's reflection, let's talk about identity, because ultimately, this entire conversation is about far more than habits or productivity. It's about who you are becoming through the accumulation of your daily choices. Rather than constantly asking the somewhat abstract question, How can I become more confident? Try shifting toward a much more concrete and actionable question. What would someone I trust myself to be do today? This subtle shift in phrasing changes everything, because it moves the focus away from a vague feeling you're chasing and toward specific, observable actions you can actually take right now. Here's something worth deeply internalizing. Self-trust isn't built during motivational moments, during the inspired bursts of energy that come after watching an uplifting video or reading a powerful quote. It's built during ordinary Tuesdays, during quiet mornings when no one is watching, during small, unremarkable decisions that never make it into any highlight reel, during private promises that only you will ever know you kept or broke. To help this idea land even more deeply, let's extend our earlier metaphor a bit further. Imagine becoming your own safest place, the person you instinctively call internally when life becomes uncertain or overwhelming. Not because you always have the perfect answer, not because you never feel afraid or uncertain, but because you know, with a deep and settled certainty, that you won't abandon yourself when things get difficult. That certainty, that quiet knowing, is worth more than any external achievement or validation ever could be. Here's a final reflection for this section. If someone were to observe only your daily habits, your actual behavior over the course of an ordinary week, with no context, no explanations, no excuses, would they conclude that you trust yourself? Would your actions speak the language of reliability, or would they tell a quieter, more inconsistent story? Vocabulary Corner. Advanced expressions from today's episode. Before you go, let's take a few minutes to review some of the richer vocabulary and expressions we used throughout today's episode, so that you can start weaving them into your own spoken and written English. Learning a language isn't only about memorizing isolated words from a list. It's about noticing how native-sounding phrases are used naturally inside real ideas, the way we've just done together for the last several minutes. Let's start with the phrase backwards, as in, what if that's completely backwards? We use this expression when something is the opposite of what we expect, or when the logical order of two things has been reversed. If you assumed confidence comes before action, but really action comes before confidence, you could say, I had it backwards the whole time. Next, consider the verb to erode, which we used when discussing how low self-trust quietly erodes different areas of life. Erosion is originally a geological term, describing how wind and water slowly wear away rock over long periods of time. In everyday English, we borrow this word to describe anything that weakens gradually rather than suddenly, such as trust, confidence, or even a relationship. We also used the expression to abandon oneself, a slightly more literary phrase that describes giving up on yourself emotionally, especially in moments of struggle. Notice how different this feels from simply saying, give up. Abandon carries a heavier, more emotional weight, often used when discussing loyalty, commitment, or self-compassion. Another useful phrase from today is decision fatigue, a compound noun describing the mental exhaustion that comes from making too many decisions in a short period of time. This is a wonderful expression to add to your vocabulary because it's commonly used in psychology, business, and self-improvement contexts, and it sounds highly natural in conversation. Let's also revisit the phrase disguised as, used in the sentence, perfectionism is often fear disguised as high standards. This structure, noun disguised as noun, is extremely useful for describing situations where something appears to be one thing on the surface, but is actually something else underneath. You might say, Procrastination is often anxiety disguised as laziness, using the exact same grammatical pattern. We use the word microscopic in an unusual, figurative way, describing microscopic promises. Normally, this word describes something so small it can only be seen through a microscope. Here, we used it metaphorically to emphasize just how small and manageable these commitments should be. This kind of figurative use of scientific vocabulary is very common in advanced, natural-sounding English. Consider also the phrase settled certainty, used when describing the quiet knowing that comes from truly trusting yourself. Settled here doesn't mean resolved in a legal or financial sense, but rather calm, steady, and free from doubt. Pairing settled with an abstract noun like certainty or confidence is a wonderful way to add emotional nuance and depth to your spoken English. Finally, let's look at the expression to weave into, as in weaving these phrases into your own spoken English. This phrasal expression comes from the physical act of weaving fabric, threads crossing over one another to create something whole. Figuratively, we use it to describe integrating small elements, like new vocabulary, seamlessly into something larger, like your everyday conversation. Try picking 2 or 3 expressions from today's list and using them naturally in a sentence about your own life before our next episode together. Real fluency doesn't come from passive recognition. It comes, just like self-trust, from small, repeated, active practice. A final word from Code Your English. Every episode we create here is built on a simple belief that language learning becomes far more powerful when it's connected to genuine ideas, real emotions, and honest self-reflection, rather than isolated grammar drills disconnected from real life. Today, we didn't just talk about vocabulary or sentence structure. We talked about something deeply human, the quiet, ongoing relationship you have with yourself, while simultaneously training your ear and your mind to recognize advanced English in context. This is exactly the philosophy behind Code Your English. We believe that when you learn a language through ideas worth thinking about, the vocabulary sticks far longer, the grammar feels far more natural, and the entire process becomes something you actually look forward to, rather than something you force yourself to endure. If today's episode gave you even one new expression, one new way of thinking about your own habits, or one moment of genuine reflection, then this conversation has done exactly what it was meant to do. So as you close this episode and step back into your day, carry both pieces with you. The small promise you intend to keep, and the small phrase you intend to practice. Language and self-trust, it turns out, are built through the very same method: small, consistent, honest repetition. As we bring today's episode to a close, let's take a moment to recap the journey we've traveled together. We began by challenging the idea that self-trust is something you're simply born with, and instead reframed it as a relationship, one built through repeated experience rather than inherited traits. We explored how self-trust quietly erodes through small, broken promises, comparison, and the constant search for external validation. We discovered that self-trust is built through evidence, not affirmations, deposit by deposit, into an emotional bank account that either grows or depletes based on our daily choices. We examined the hidden cost that low self-trust exacts on our relationships, careers, and decision-making. We talked about rebuilding through microscopic promises, about learning to listen again to the quiet instrument of our own intuition, and about failure not as an enemy of self-trust, but as one of its greatest teachers. And finally, we arrived at identity itself, the understanding that who we become is shaped not by big dramatic moments, but by ordinary Tuesdays and quiet mornings. Let's reinforce the central message one final time, because it deserves to be repeated. Self-trust isn't inherited. It isn't reserved only for naturally confident people. It isn't a fixed personality type that some people have and others simply lack. It's a practice. It's a habit. It's evidence, collected patiently over time, one small promise at a time. Before we part ways today, I'd like to leave you with a few honest questions to carry forward. What promise have you been postponing, quietly? Perhaps for weeks or even months? What would genuinely change in your life if you believed your own word again, the way you once believed the word of someone you deeply trusted? And which version of yourself are you actively becoming right now through the small choices you're making today? I want to end with a calm and hopeful thought, one I hope you'll carry with you well beyond this episode. Your relationship with yourself isn't determined by your past, by every broken promise or missed opportunity that came before this moment. It's shaped, continuously and gently, by the promises you choose to keep from this moment forward. Thank you so much for spending this time with me here on Code Your English, reflecting, thinking, and practicing advanced English together. As you move through the coming week, I invite you to carry one simple question with you, one small but powerful thought to return to whenever you need it. What is one small promise I can keep today that my future self will quietly thank me for? Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next episode for another conversation that strengthens both your English and your understanding of yourself. See you next time, right here on Code Your English.